So let's give everybody the opportunity to get in. Okay. So good evening or good afternoon. I'm Sarit Zehavi, I'm a CEO, and I'm proud and honored to moderate tonight's or this lunchtime panel on the new Middle East. As an Israeli, by the way, to say the new Middle East is always exciting, but I think it is a new Middle East, and we are looking forward to 2021, risks and opportunities. For those of you who are not familiar with our work, ALMA is a non-partisan research and education center that focuses on Israel's security challenges along the northern border. We see it as our personal mission to provide research and analysis of the geopolitical reality and the developments in Israel and neighboring countries in the north, Lebanon and Syria, and their effect on our security. I'm speaking to you, by the way, from my private shelter at home since the lockdown, 2 square meters at the first floor, around 7 miles from the Israeli-Lebanese border. Our main interest in ALMA is Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Iranian development proxies, and like second Hezbollah in Syria. And of course, you are invited to check our website. Please note that you can write any questions that may arise to one or all our panelists in the Zoom Q&A box below. And of course, those of you that are joining us on the media can write the questions over there as well, and we will try to address all the questions by the second part of the panel. I would like to thank one of the organizations that co-sponsored this panel, Council for Secure America. Special thanks to the co-chair, Fred Zaidman, and many CSA members that are joining us today. CSA is a US-based educational nonprofit that focuses on national security by way of American energy independence and the strategic alliance between the US and Israel. CSA is a critical partnership between leading American energy executives and the pro-Israel community. And to the hot topic of today, 2021 brings both risks and opportunities. On the one hand, the Abraham Accords, a lot of hope for a new era, for peace, for prosperity, cooperation between Israel and the Arab world, something that seems to be far-fetched only a year ago. Now, all of a sudden, we have normalization agreements with the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco, and maybe more. And on the other hand, Iran is more determined than ever to expand its Shiite Axis in the Middle East. Most notably for us in Israel is the Iranian progress in the nuclear project and the creation of a new front against Israel from the Syrian Southwest, and maybe even some more threats from Yemen, terror attacks against Israel, Israeli presence around the globe. We've seen a lot of that over the news in the past few days. In order to analyze these risks, I would like to approach our first speaker of today, Udi Ari, one of Israel's most prominent journalists. Ari is the commentator in Israel's Channel 12 News on Middle Eastern affairs, and is the author of 8 books of the Arab-Israeli conflict. He also serves as an international fellow of the Washington Institute. Good evening, Ehud.
Good evening. Hi, everybody.
And on a personal note, I'm greatly honored to have you with us today because, you know, I study about the Middle East since I was 16, and you were my role model as the Israeli expert on those issues. So I'm really excited to be with you today. Mr. Yari, what do you predict Iran's plan of action would be in 2029 in terms of its Shiite Axis expansionist activities in the upcoming year, and in line of the internal situation in Iran and the new administration in Washington? Moreover, looking at the increased tensions on Israel's northern borders, what is the likelihood of deterioration, even deterioration into war, when we speak about all these issues of Iran versus Israel?
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure being with you. I will be brief, and I'll offer you a few bullets in the interest of keeping it short. One, I think the Iranians will do everything they can in order to get the US back on the nuclear deal on their terms. On their terms, meaning without any adjustments, modifications, any changes. In order to get that, the Iranians are willing, and I think they stand a good chance of getting it, some form of a pretense reconciliation arrangement with the Gulf states. I hear the voices in Saudi Arabia in the past few days. They are getting ready to talk to the Iranians if President Biden indeed gets a deal to revive the nuclear deal. The third point I will make is the Iranians have reached the conclusion that the price that they will have to pay is mainly in Yemen, ending the war in Yemen, which I believe is going to take place this year. And I also believe that once the war in Yemen, at least in its present form, is over, the closeness between the Houthis and the Islamic Republic regime will be effectively disrupted. As for our front, I believe that the Iranians have reached the conclusion that they have failed so far, mainly thanks to the Israeli Air Force, but some other units as well, in establishing production lines of precision-guided missiles in either Lebanon or Syria. They have managed to smuggle few, or just a bit more than a few, but no production lines, which is a very big difference. And they have taken a decision, which I will see will continue going into deeper into 2021. They will try to embed themselves within existing and restructured units of the Syrian army, rather than establish in Syria a war machine purely on their own, which was the objective of the late Qasem Soleimani. They understand they cannot get it, so let's take over, they are saying to themselves, let's take over Syrian units. Good example is the 4th division under the brother of Assad, the Maher, and gain sort of control through there. Hezbollah at this point would be very keen not to get involved in a fist fight with Israel. They have a mess at home. They have a mess within Hezbollah and the Shiite community. So to conclude, I would say, I think the main thing is if the nuclear deal is indeed revived, then we will see the main developments taking place in the Persian Gulf.
Well, this is a very optimistic point of view. I must say that from Alma's point of view, we see a lot of developments of Iranian proxies along the Israeli-Syrian border. As you said, using Syrian army, but also developing kind of a Syrian Hezbollah over there and establishing local militias that are not very professional and yet can pose some challenges to the security on the borderline.
I'll give a blunt answer with your permission, Sarit. And the answer is, I think Israel is too vegetarian, too cautious in its policies in southern Syria. I've been saying this from 2012. I think there is a situation in the southern part of Syria that is the distance between Damascus and the Golan Heights is 100 kilometers. The same is to the Jordanian border. Within this region, which is the most important for us, there is a lot that Israel can do. If I have to put it very, very bluntly, there are lots of ways at no great cost to buy friends and influence and affect the situation on the ground and prevent the Iranians from paying meager salaries to rebels who were supported by us until 2018 and recruiting them to serve them. If we stay as we are now, it's the Air Force and nothing else, we are going to lose, I believe, in 2 years, any chance of reversing the current trend in southern Syria.
Okay, so now I want to move forward to talk about opportunities of collaboration, opportunities of addressing these Iranian challenges in the region. And in order to do so, I want to speak with our second guest tonight, Ron Prosor, Ambassador Ron Prosor, who is the head of Abba Eban Institute of International Diplomacy at the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya, IDC, which also sponsored this event. The Abba Eban Institute is a proactive research center working to study, theorize, and help craft an innovative, effective, and proactive diplomatic infrastructure for the State of Israel in order to strengthen its international relations and diplomatic influence through proactive actions and interdisciplinary approach. It is a do tank rather than a think tank that provides professional knowledge and offers practical policies for decision and opinion makers. Ambassador Prosor also served as Israel's 16th permanent representative to the United Nations and as the Director General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and is considered one of the most experienced and talented Israeli diplomats. Good evening, Ron. Mute. Unmute yourself, please. Unmute yourself, please. We can't hear you. Unmute yourself. Good evening.
Sarit, first of all, we're all happy that you are back with us after basically defeating COVID-19, which shows the strength of Israeli women on the front line. And secondly, you missed mentioning that the Queen is still not recovered in the United Kingdom. She's moving her hand in an uncontrollable way, asking for Charles to say, you know, will he be king or will he not? But I want to use the opportunity to continue what Ehud, who also is not just a friend, but an amazing man who knows the region on the palm of the hand. And two interesting bullet points. One, and I'm saying things that Ehud did not mention, elections in Iran in June. Meaning this element is absolutely crucial for the Biden administration because they have to, at least if they want to do something in Iran, they want to show the elements inside Iran that are more pragmatic. I would never say moderate about the Middle East, but that's one thing which defines the timeline, because they have many things on their agenda, and as already someone said, if you don't think of visiting the Middle East will visit you. Hence, the Iranians are going to make absolutely sure, one way or another, and usually this is not through Mama Teresa, to make sure that the attention span of this administration is going to be focused on moving in that direction. Two, Israel has to make a decision, and I think the decision is very important, that it's easier to, like Waldorf and Stadler, to sit on the balcony and shout it's a lousy show, but it's more important to be in the negotiation table. Hence, voicing our disagreements, what we want to really define the loopholes. And we are in the advanced class, so I'm not going to go into the loopholes to make sure that if an agreement is being negotiated, it's going to be a much better agreement. Things have changed in 4 years. The Middle East is different. And we have, and Ehud mentioned it, the Yemen issue. So let me continue to remind our audience that the Egyptians were in Yemen in the mid-60s. They ran with a tail between their legs. When the Saudis asked Sisi to help them in Yemen, Sisi gave them an Egyptian answer. You'll see us with binoculars and not today. Now, the Saudis have no chance in winning anything in Yemen. So in essence, I think we will see the Saudis agreeing, because they would define it as American pressure, to stop what's happening in Yemen. And they would do it in an amazing Arab way. They would declare victory where total failure has occurred. Now, to move over, okay. Sorry.
I must have a follow-up question. Since everything you've said, do you see any opportunity in the Abraham Accords towards the issue, the Iranian problem, or the threats that Iran poses to the region?
Absolutely, Sarit. What do you mean? For the first time, first of all, it's not coincidental. Israel is being moved to CENTCOM. Okay, this is also not coincidental. Israel was, I won't get into it, was always in EUCOM, CENTCOM, meaning Israel will cooperate with the Arab world. It's obvious to the American administration that the Gulfies, the Saudis, the Emiratis, which is not new, but now it's above the radar screen, see Israel as part of the solution, not part of the problem. We have coinciding interests. We have coinciding interests on the issue of Iran, and in essence, this strengthens the bond between Israel and the Gulf states in a lot of dimensions. And in the sense, I believe that this cooperation that is now open, and by the way, I was there, I think, a month ago, okay? And I was there under the radar screen when I headed Israel's Foreign Service nearly 15 years ago. It's an amazing element to see the people-to-people element, the fact that they are willing openly to talk about cooperation. This is something that we're missing both in Egypt and in Jordan, which is a seminar by itself, but it gives me a lot, not just of optimism, but it's obvious that the new administration in the US acknowledges that. They know that this is the case, and it's important to have a framework of backing anything, especially on the Iranian issue and other issues also in the region.
We wonder here in Alma when we will see the first shipment of Iron Dome landing in the UAE.
Well, I think that it's probably going to happen, and because it's logical, it can be seen as defensive, and I think it's in the interest of all the parties involved. So in the sense, all those three elements check the list.
At this point, I would like to turn to our third distinguished guest tonight, William Daroff, who was named by the Jerusalem Post as being among the 50 most influential Jews worldwide. He was nominated the CEO of the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations exactly 1 year ago, so congratulations. He is the senior professional guiding the conference agenda on behalf of the 53 national member organizations, which will represent the wide mosaic of American Jewish life. Good evening, William.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you all, and with you, Sarit, and definitely with Ron and Ehud, two icons in this field, and it's really wonderful to be with you all. So, Sarit, you want me to talk about my thoughts on the plan of action for the new American administration?
Yes, and you know what? Since it was all over the news this past week, I think the main question that everybody would like to hear about is the JCPOA. Is there going to be any negotiation with Iran, or they're just going to be back in the deal and just cancel the sanctions?
Excellent question. And to some extent, there's the old adage that those who know don't say, and those who say don't know. But we can definitely read some tea leaves and can talk about conversations that we've heard both publicly and privately. Administration officials have made clear in their recent comments that the Iranians must return to compliance with the JCPOA before the U.S. would enter the agreement. Our new Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, stated last week that we are a long way from reaching that point. However, if Iran were to come back into full compliance with its obligations under the JCPOA, Blinken and others have said the U.S. would pursue new talks. Of course, that is a big if, as Iran has repeatedly and recklessly violated the terms of the agreement, and there's no indication that it intends to fall in line anytime soon. Aside from compliance with the JCPOA, our new National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, with whom many of us have worked over the years on these issues, has said that it'll be necessary for Iran to address its aggression across the Middle East prior to initiating any new negotiations. He also stressed that it's critical for an early priority for the deal to deal with Iran's steady march towards successfully developing nuclear weapons, indicating that the Biden administration will encourage Iran to soften its stance so that talks can begin. It's really unclear at this point when that would be reached, though. Iran's ambassador to the UN recently said that the regime is setting February 21st as a deadline for the Biden administration to lift sanctions before it will re-enter the JCPOA and comply with it. And in fact, just yesterday, Iranian Foreign Minister Zarif told Christina Amanpour on CNN that Iran will not act unilaterally without a concomitant U.S. action. So based on the administration's clearly defined position, I think that the timeline that the Iranians are presenting seems untenable at best. So I think it's very much at this point a dance to see who's going to move first and the extent to which Iran will bend.
So that's very interesting. I think that the last week supplied us with a lot of expressions that, for me as an Israeli, gave me a lot of hope that people in the new administration do understand that the situation is a little bit more complicated now than what they thought of. How do you see the progress of the normalization process and efforts? Are we going to see more countries that will jump in? Is the new administration froze the F-35 deal with the UAE? Where is this going?
Another great question. We've heard countless commitments by the administration officials in support of the normalization initiatives of the previous administration. We've seen that just recently with confirmation hearings that Tony Blinken had. And in fact, when you talk to Biden administration officials about just about anything related to the Trump administration, they will attack just about every component of what they did in foreign policy and domestic policy, except as it relates to normalization. So I think that there's certainly an intent and one that I've heard by administration officials to try to use that lever of the Gulf states to try to engage with Israel and to try to, frankly, to soften Israeli policies towards the Palestinians as well. For sure, you can't pick up the Washington Post, and I'm in Washington as we speak, you can't pick up the Washington Post without reading about the murder of Khashoggi and about Saudi violations of human rights and Yemen and the like. And that is absolutely something that resonates in democratic foreign policy circles here and is going to be an early obstacle for the normalization process. And it's something that I think we're seeing the UAE and the Saudis dealing with as far as trying to take some steps towards the Biden administration. And I would defer to my closer in experts, but I imagine that's what we saw with the softening towards Qatar, with the GCC within the last couple of weeks as well, where the Gulf states are seeing that there's a new sheriff in town and they're looking to try to move in a direction to placate those interests and to address those interests. And my hope is, and all indications are, that won't stand in the way of continued normalization with Israel, because obviously these negotiations, multilateral negotiations, have multilateral factors at play.
Moreover, I believe that the processes of normalization with Israel will bring more openness and progress and moderate approach from these countries like Saudi Arabia, which is a very good example, and not vice versa. We cannot just stand and wait until the moment that Saudi Arabia will stop, will become a democracy. We need to move forward and maybe that way bring a little bit of progress in this issue.
For sure. I think people-to-people exchanges are important, and just looking at all that was brought back besides COVID from the interaction between Israel and the Gulf states over the last month or so. It's really remarkable seeing Israelis there and seeing Gulfies in Israel. I think that it's a new dimension that really opens up a new door into the 21st century of a new world order and a new Middle East.
Definitely, I agree. Ehud, I want to take us a little bit, to the basic lines of Iran. I'm usually being asked about what's the strategy, what's the main idea or purpose of the Iranians. Can you walk us through the connections between nuclear ambitions of the Iranians and its involvement in the Middle East? What's the global strategy of Iran in all of that?
Yes, thank you. I will answer that, and then, with your permission, I want to say something about the follow-up for the normalization and the Abraham Accords, which I think is extremely important next year for the new administration in Washington, D.C. As to Iran, I am one of those, not too many of us, who do not believe that the Iranians are galloping towards a bomb. Oh yes, I have no doubt that they want to be just beneath the red line, just able to do that in few minutes, but to package a bomb, announce it, let alone test it, too risky for them. And anyway, Iran will never go for a bomb. If they do, they will go only for an arsenal. And we can have a conversation what constitutes an arsenal. No less than 5 or 7 bombs. So, in this respect, Tony Blinken said they could have in few weeks enough enriched uranium, low-grade 20% for one bomb. It doesn't tell us much about where they are. The Iranian emphasis for years now has been on trying to establish, to encircle Israel with a ring of fire, a ring of missiles, tighten the noose around our necks without committing necessarily Iranian troops. Instructors, weapons, yes, but not Iranians. Please remember, for over 200 years, Iran didn't fight outside its borders unless it was forced to by Saddam in the 80s. The last major war the Iranians fought was within Iran to destroy an Arab emirate in the oil province of Khuzestan. So the idea was, we will get the Arabs, those masses of what I call the hopeless, helpless, jobless millions of the decline and collapse and implosion of Arab nationalism, we will get them to do the job and we'll show them how. This is Qasem Soleimani in a nutshell. When Qasem Soleimani was taken by the Americans, I compared his assassination to the assassination of Heydrich. Because since Heydrich, killed 42 in Prague. Nobody, none of the Arabs had a strategy, a work plan, how to cope with Israel. Slimani was the one who had a formula to put forward. The second point, with your permission, I'll try to make it very brief, is about what's the second floor of the Abraham Accords. I have to say that I know for a fact, I'm not speculating now, if there were no elections in America and transition and whatever it entails, people change in the offices. And if we had a prime minister who is not totally immersed in Corona and his trial and politics and election, we would have at least two more. I'm on safe ground saying 3 more Abraham Accords. Ready, they are ready now to be picked. But the most important thing is this. We have the two pillars for a regional system to confront Iran. And without going into the details, one is the East Med organization, in which you have Egypt, Israel, Cyprus, Greece. I'm speaking always about the Hellenic Jewish Alliance, Italy. UAE is now an observer. This is one pillar which is already in place, and it has a military dimension. You can see, for example, the Israeli Air Force in Crete or in Sardinia, and the UAE Air Force training with the Greeks. And I'm not going to any more details. The second pillar is the Red Sea Council of the littoral states of the Red Sea Basin. What is important is to get both Israel, which is a littoral state with our port in Eilat, and from my point of view, PA2, PA is also on the East Med organization, to get Israel to join in some status, and the UAE, which keeps bases in the Red Sea, like the port of Asab in Eritrea, join this council. So then you have two organizations, both ends of the Suez Canal, one in the northern entry to the canal and one in the south. Link them together and then get them some link to whatever will emerge in what they call now the Quad. That is the anti-China coalition in the Western Indian Ocean. Now it's Japan, India, Australia, US, Indonesia. We'll see in the future. Here you have the beginnings of a possibility to form a regional system. And finally, I will just mention something that people tend to forget, and it's very important. In 2018, when Saudi Arabia acquired back from Egypt sovereignty over the islands of Tiran and Sanafir, at the entrance and the mouth of the Gulf of Aqaba, the Saudis have committed themselves to abide by the provisions of the Israeli-Egyptian Peace Treaty and Military Protocol of 1979, which made Saudi Arabia already today, if you want, a silent third party to the Israeli-Egyptian peace. I believe this is the way to go. Thank you.
Moreover, you can say that this East Med alliance is also a way to deal with the issue of Turkey, which we didn't mention until now.
The East Med alliance is, yes, it has a sort of anti-Turkish vibration, but I think we will be able to tell which way Erdogan will be going only when we see, Ron and me were talking about it privately before, only when we see what is the approach of the Biden administration to Turkey. It will be very different than Trump's. But are they going to deal with Turkey the way my friend Jim Jeffrey did? I mean, tolerate, but see the value of Turkey? Or are they going to say, we are not going to play your game at all and do different? I think Erdogan is waiting for that. It's not just by chance that he's putting fillers to Israel. He's putting at the same time fillers to Egypt. He understands that he may have to find a new position.
So Ron, I want to add another question to you after what Ehud just said, and actually offered one way to address this problem of the Iranian threat upon Israel with the missiles and maybe nuclear threat with the proxies. What else can we do? And you heard the head chief of staff this week, Kohavi, that said that Israel is preparing for military attack against Iran. What else could be done in this complicated situation and with the new administration in Washington?
First, I'd like to say that I have to start that I disagree with Ehud on the Iran and the Iran nuclear program quest, and I think he knew that we would disagree on this. And no one can really answer it, okay? So how can I best describe it? Did you all see the movie The Pink Panther with Peter Sellers? So there's a part in the movie where he goes over to Peter Sellers and asks him, tell me, can I pat you? Does your dog bite? And Peter Sellers says, no. So he pats the dog and the dog bites him. And then he looks at Peter Sellers perplexed and he says, but you said that your dog does not bite. And Peter Sellers says, it is not my dog. So this dog can bite. The Iranians, in the sense, I would not put any money on the fact that the Iranians, first of all, amazing negotiators. I mean, look, they are not just carpet makers, they are carpet weavers. They take every red line, they divide it into 5 pink lines, they pass every pink line, and before you say Jack Robinson, they're way beyond the red line. And they are not just amazing negotiators, in the sense they have a mission. And if they have, and I think that's what they're seeking, a nuclear ability, then if they use it or they don't use it, we cannot live like this. And jump forward to remind us all, okay? And we all were convinced, you know, for years. And I'm connecting Hezbollah now, which, by the way, the Abba Evan Institute does interesting stuff on this also internationally, on, you know, putting some pressure on Hezbollah on the more policy side. We, for years, we told ourselves that Hezbollah, and Ehud knows it, in its essence, a Lebanese organization that has Lebanese interests in its forefront, okay? And that's why we explained when they said they needed an independent army to fight who? The Zionist entity, Israel. And surprise, surprise, when the master in Tehran told Hassan, dear Hassan, you can't be sitting on the fence here. We paid you, we gave you weapons, we need you to operate in Syria. Hassan Nasrallah is not an idiot, he's very smart. He knows that by operating in Syria, he's going to have a backlash into Lebanon, okay? Hassan Nasrallah didn't have a choice. And he operated in Syria, knows very well what he did in the sense, both in the Arab world, okay, and the young people who admired him, and what implications it has inside Lebanon. What bottom line of what I'm saying? Hezbollah clearly under Iranian influence much more than we told ourselves all those years. Why am I connecting the two? Because Iran, I think, clearly is going in that direction. And what we should be doing is to do everything we can to make sure that they do not reach this stage. So I'm not going into the, under the radar screen stuff that is happening. I'm not going into the military side. I think that on the diplomatic side, we have to be able to make sure that we are around the table with this administration, also on the European side. And I want to add something which is, first of all, guys, and you have to understand it, and I think around in this panel, everyone knows, the guys that are coming into the Biden administration are very experienced. They're not new to this. They have a Weltanschauung, or, the way they see the world. And the way they see the world is clearly after many years. So it's not that they're very experienced. We have to connect to this circle of United States, European countries. And I want to tell you, knowing Tony Blinken, I would think that France would play a very, very major role in the negotiations with Iran. I think it's not bad for Israel, because on the Iranian issue, the French have always been quite tough. And we have to do two things. The military, under the radar screen, continue this, but on the diplomatic side, to make sure we are around the table. And if you're not around the table, sometimes you are part of the menu. So let's be part of the table.
Well, in my point of view, what Kohavi said actually gave more cards to Biden to play with, because that way Biden administration can always say, these crazy Israelis, they are preparing for attack. This is a totally different position when in the negotiation, when you have a military attack on the table.
Well, first of all, I would be very cautious, okay? So yes, it's basically saying that how Israel sees the situation, but here I would think that there's, we shouldn't be declaring so much. We should be there intimately talking with the best ally that we have, and that is the United States of America, on an issue which is number one in Israel's national interest, and we know how to do that, and that's what we should be doing.
William, before we move to the Q&A, of course, there is, an elephant in the room that we must address, which is the Palestinian issue. It's a new administration in Washington, probably completely new approach to this Palestinian issue. What do you anticipate? How is this, where is this going?
Great, thank you, Sarit. And let me just add my 2 cents of agreement with Ron that we should not undercount or underestimate Iran's pursuit of a nuclear capacity and the speed with which they are doing so. As it relates to Israel's relationships with the Palestinians, I think in this administration we will see a renewed pursuit of a two-state future for Israel and the Palestinians, in which the Jewish state lives in peace and security alongside a viable Palestinian entity, which I remind everyone is consistent in very general terms with the goals of the Trump peace plan, which was endorsed by the Netanyahu government, with the Bar Ilan speech that the prime minister made almost 20 years ago. So I think there'll be a renewed focus on that. I don't know that at the end of the day, there'll be much of a change. The Biden administration has committed to keeping the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem and has expressed interest, as we mentioned before, in continuing to facilitate the normalization agreements. I think that as it relates to the Palestinians, one thing that I'm hopeful for is that the administration will recognize that the road to peace does not necessarily have to start and stop in Ramallah. The acting U.S. ambassador to the UN, Richard Mills, said last week that the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians is no longer the primary fault line in the Middle East, but that its resolution would nonetheless be a boon to the state of the region as a whole. And I think that this statement supports the fact that during the previous administration, this idea of all roads running through Ramallah had been a failure. And this opens the door for more engagement to be presented by the Abraham Accords as something that needs to be maintained and built upon. Middle East peace must no longer be held hostage to the whims of a man who is serving in the 17th year of his 4-year term, and a Palestinian leadership that, to quote the great Israeli statesman Abba Eban, never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity. So I'm hopeful that that the lessons of the last 4 years will not be lost, and that the administration will be able to leverage these new relationships in order to try to decompress and depressurize issues there. But at the end of the day, it's really up to the Israelis and the Palestinians. And in this case, we've seen only Palestinian intransigence in recent memory, and so I don't see an indication that there'll be a real major change there.
Okay, this is very interesting. At least for me, I'm surprised by your answer. Ehud, we cannot go forward without giving you 1 minute, but really 1 minute, because I want to give the floor to questions about this Palestinian issue, where this is going from the Palestinian side when they are looking to Washington.
As far as my information goes, I do not believe the new team recruited by Biden are going to try another John Kerry / Martin Indyk style run for the goalpost. That's not going to happen. Not even Rob Malley. I think that what we will see is an attempt to try and get to a point of where you can start improving the situation, upgrading the relations between Israel and the PA, probably different sorts of interim agreement. But before, I have to say that, before the Biden administration gets there, they have to make up their mind. Are they going to repeat President Bush, George, mistake, pushing Arik Sharon as prime minister to get Palestinian elections in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip in 2006, which ended in a Hamas victory? If the question is on the table now, is the Biden team going to encourage Abu Mazen, Mr. Abbas, to go into a partnership in Hamas, thereby getting Hamas back into the West Bank and penetrating into Palestinian Authority institutions? This is now the big question. The rest will follow.
Very interesting. Okay, before we move forward, I just want to thank one more organization that co-sponsored this event, the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement, which is a non-partisan global grassroots movement of individuals and organizations across all religions and faiths united to combat anti-Semitism. CAS's unique platform creates partnerships throughout the world, strategically implementing new and creative solutions to combat the world's oldest hatred. CAS leveraged the collective power of a broad-based coalition to unite individuals of all backgrounds in this fight against anti-Semitism, very important fight. So I'm moving now to the Q&A. We have many questions over here. I hope we will be capable of addressing at least most of them. Let's start with a question to William. The Biden administration freezes F-35 sent to the UAE. Do you think that the normalization with other countries will be harder now after this decision? Does it not send a global message that an American promise can only be fulfilled by the current administration in place?
An excellent question. I think in the specific terms here, the administration has said loudly and clearly that they are suspending all arms sales at the beginning of the administration, and that's something that is standard for new administrations to do as they come into office, and that they do not, that freezing shouldn't be seen as an indication one way or another of where the administration will be at the end of the day. UAE's ambassador to the United States, Otaba, said yesterday that he does not anticipate at the end of the day that the F-35 sale will be frozen. We'll see how that plays out. I think that it is certainly not new that as administrations change, the commitments they make, and in fact, the letters they write are sometimes not abided by future administrations. So that's par for the course. But that being said, I think that there's no indication that the administration will just wholesale pull the rug out from beneath these deals. But as I said earlier, there are other factors at play in the bilateral relations between the U.S. And the Gulf states that I think will be part of a larger discussion. Things like human rights, things like Yemen, and the like, and America will balance that based on our interests generally. But I'm hopeful that those commitments will not be withdrawn, and that this is just part of a normal process and also part of the sort of back and forth of diplomacy.
Okay, there is another question here to Ehud. How do you think the migration of Shiite militias of many nationalists to Syria will result in the long term? We're speaking about the demographic issue in Syria.
I think that the Assad regime, as long as they are allowed to stay, and their Iranian sponsors and Russian backers, who do not see any more eye to eye with either Assad or the Iranians. But as long as they do not strike some sort of an understanding with the US and the West and the Europeans, we will not see the millions of Sunni refugees and displaced going back to hundreds of devastated towns and villages and townlets, etc. And the Iranians will keep trying to do what they are doing now. For example, they are trying to convert the southern suburb of Damascus into a Shiite stronghold. In Dar'a, which is, 50 kilometers from the Israeli border on the Golan, they are paying people to convert to Shiism. This is and the same goes on the Euphrates, in the region of Deir ez-Zor, etc., which is another opera. I don't think we are going into that now. But I owe one sentence because I saw some question marks about what I'm saying about the Iranian nuke. And just to clarify myself, I think the Iranians are trying to move as fast forward under nuclear plans as is diplomatically feasible. What I think is that there is a big difference between them getting to the threshold and them crossing the red line. And I think there we will see a watershed. And if I can, an anecdote, I was friends with the head of the Russian Atomic Energy Commission in the old days. Maybe Ron remembers him, Mr. Rumyantsev.
Also, Rumyantsev.
A good Jew with a Russian name.
He's a good friend of Gidon Franks.
Good, yeah. He always sent regards to him. So at one point, he was appointed as ambassador of Russia to Finland. You know, special relations, and doesn't matter, I have a family relationship to Finland. We sit in Finland, and the year is 98. And Rumyantsev, who was pestered by the Americans and by us about the nuclear reactor in Bushehr at the time, he says to me, and I have the paper, and he wrote to me a commitment. When I'm long gone, the Iranians will be nowhere near an atom bomb. So this is just an anecdote from Helsinki, in the snow. In this respect, I'm still a disciple of Rumi Yantsev. Thank you.
Ron, there is a question here that says that Blinken gives Iran weeks until they have a nuclear bomb. Israel says about 6 months. In either case, it's not enough for the US-Iran negotiations to mature. What is the likelihood that Israel will take military action?
No. First of all, Blinken, I read his statement. This was not exactly what he said. But the point here is very clear. The timeline, and especially on the issue of enrichment, the minute the Iranians are moving into 20% new centrifuges. I don't want to bore, our audience with things that I dealt with for many, many years. But the bottom line is that they are clearly going in that direction, and we have to make sure, and I'm repeating that because look, you're talking about galloping into an agreement. Shimon Peres, and I will try and imitate him, said, William, we have to, when we see a galloping horse, we have to jump on it before it gallops away. So the opportunities are there to really use this administration to create a structure that and close the loopholes, because I want to say a statement which people forget. What do you think? Israel is not for an agreement? Of course we are for an agreement. We are, people forget to, of course we are for an agreement. We want the Iranians not to have a nuclear bomb. So we are not just, putting and saying, oh, we just want to now bomb Iran. Absolutely not. But the agreement has to prevent Iran from achieving nuclear weapons. And this issue is absolutely crucial. It's crucial for us, it's crucial for the region, it's crucial for the way this region is going to look in the future. And this is not just us. The most important thing is that I think after a very long time, we see the whole region, the whole neighborhood, basically saying to the US, to Europe, stop Iran, okay? And now on the issue, and of course an anecdote to Ehud, yes, the Russians then, the Russians are amazing, I'll add to that they made sure that things that had to reach Bushehr, the timelines, and suddenly things broke and didn't come at the right time. The Russians know how to operate, but the Iranians also have to understand that if they continue, there's a military option on the table. And I want to talk about it, which is absolutely crucial of getting people focused on this, okay? Now, do I think that in the past, this was a credible threat by the United States or by Europe? I don't want to now, say things that I think about Europe on this, okay? Because I want to stay diplomatic, okay? But was it really a credible threat? The answer is no. Does Israel, with all the amazing friendship and the strategic ally that is unprecedented, no one comes close to the United States, can we rely on the United States only on this? Let's look at facts, okay? I can give you many examples, but I won't go back to Osirak in 1980, but go back to 2007, okay? 2007, this is not even saying anything about the democratic, this is George Bush, Condoleezza Rice. I am the Director General of Israel's Foreign Service, okay? Basically, we catch the Iranians, we catch the Syrians with a hand in the cookie jar, okay? A nuclear facility, breaking all the red lines. We bring the evidence to the United States of America, okay? The US is preoccupied in Iraq and Afghanistan, and basically Condoleezza Rice gives us an amazing idea, even before I was at the UN. hey, why don't we go to the UN and tell Bashar, this is really not a good idea. Ehud Olmert, at the end of the day, so the US, when we have factual evidence, which we are probably not going to, it's not a smoking gun, it's a double smoking gun, okay? So we have to rely, of course, it's a different story. Iran is not Syria, but I'm giving you, the issue of what you do when people cross the red lines. And there has to be a credible element here by any administration for the Iranians to move. The Iranians are amazing. And we in Israel, it's important for people to understand. We don't look at the Iranians as black or white. We understand this as an amazing, it's a civilization. It's an amazing leadership, very sophisticated, okay? Understands and checks. Just look at how they checked the issues of what they did in the Gulf. They took out a drone. They looked for response. No response. That's nice. We go after, a nice oil ship. No response? Oh, that's very interesting. We move to the next stage, to missiles and Saudi, and they're checking all the time. And if they see that there's no response, they will continue, believe me. And like I said, huge respect for them. And as you know, most of our generals, defense ministers of Iranian origin. So we take them seriously.
Wow, Warren, thank you very much. I couldn't agree more. So we have to wrap it up, though. I think we can speak for another hour or so. It's always interesting with you guys. No doubt it's going to be a very interesting year. And here in the Alma Center, likewise, other organizations that took part in this event, we're going to have a lot of work to be done because things are rapidly changing. And there are a lot of risks and opportunities in this that we must, take in both hands and see what could be done. So a lot of work for all of us. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us today. I was truly honored. Thank all the attendees who watched us live on Zoom, on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, everywhere. And of course, ask all the questions. If you love our work, you can always donate and support us however you like and win whatever you can. And of course, if you like this session, you can book a private webinar for your own group. Now it's obviously not the time to travel, but we can bring the northern border to you, and we have various of interesting ways to do that. All our educational programs of ALMA are available digitally. I'm Sarit Zahavi from the Galilee, Northern Israel. Shalom, and see you next time. Thank you very much, Ehud Yaari, Ambassador Prosor, and William Daouf. Thank you very much.
Shalom. Toda. Thank you.
Thank you so much.